agricultural technical group. I'll put dates for those meetings up on the screen later in the presentation, but just so you know, we will be kind of referring to those things throughout the meeting. Again, I do hope you all feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. For those of you who are participating via webinar, the speakers in this room are not particularly great. So we would ask that if you're participating via webinar, please submit any questions or comments to managementplans@azwater.gov. And we have someone monitoring that inbox who can read those questions for you as you submit them. So, like I said, today's meeting is all about data. What kind of data do we have access to? What is unique? What is reported? Where is this data strong, and where might it be a little bit weak? So please do stop me if I'm going too fast. I know there's a lot of information in this presentation, so please just raise a hand and let me know if you have any questions. So I'm going to start with a general overview of how the data is collected and compiled each year, and then we'll move into a kind of a high-level summary of that data for each AMA. So you'll remember that the Groundwater Management Act put into place a tiered regulatory structure for groundwater in this state, with additional provisions applying as we move into the higher levels of regulation. So it's in the AMAs and the INAs, the active management areas and the irrigation non-expansion areas, that reporting requirements apply. You can see on this map the kind of areas in color here are the AMAs and the INAs. Inside the, outside these areas, outside the colored areas on the map, we might have access to some water level data, calculated water use estimates, those sorts of things. But the data outside the active management areas and the irrigation non-expansion areas is really pretty limited, and the level of reliability is not as good as inside these regulated areas. So when we talk about reported data, which is what I'm going to be focusing on today, we are largely referring to the data from the AMA annual reports. Users with wells greater than 35 gallons per minute inside the AMAs and INAs must meter their pumping, and those who are subject to reporting requirements have to file annual reports with ADWR. These reports have a very broad range of information, which varies by the type of right or the type of use. But very generally, they contain the volumes of water pumped or received in other ways, and then what happens to that water once it is pumped or received. There are certain reporting requirements laid out in statute, but ADWR also has the authority to require additional information in these reports as necessary to accomplish the goals of each AMA. Part of the discussion today and in the subgroups will be whether we have access to the correct information in order to best analyze progress toward the goals, and whether the conservation programs are contributing to moving each AMA toward its goal. So this is kind of a broad overview of what happens to that data once ADWR gets it. I know there's a lot on this screen, so I'm just going to run through and describe each piece here. Annual reports are due on March 31st each year, but that does not mean that that data is immediately available on March 31st. Some of our annual reports are submitted online, but many users still submit paper copies that must be manually entered into our database. AMA staff work through this data entry, conduct quality checks on the data, and work to compile and store that data in a number of different ways. So the compiled data for each sector, so what you can see here is a list of each sector. I know that's a little hard to read, sorry. So the compiled data for each sector feeds up into compiled data for each AMA, which feeds into kind of a cumulative AMA data repository. Then the data from each of the AMAs is combined with information from outside the AMAs that we receive from other sources to create a statewide water use estimate each year. This is a long and detailed and complicated process, and ADWR targets completing this compilation by November of each year. So we receive, for example, 2018's report at the end of March or the beginning of April, and we work to compile that with a target of completing that 2018 data compilation by the end of November of 2019. So we do not have access yet to the full set of 2018 data. So the compilation results in these charts that many of you are familiar with. These charts have been published on an annual basis for several years now and can be found at arizonawaterfacts.com. Even though we have compiled this information annually for many years, it was typically only published as these types of high-level summaries with not a lot of detail, or as parts of reports like the strategic vision or documents like the management plans. So as a part of ongoing data communication and transparency efforts, last year the AMAs put up a new AMA data page that we're really proud of. It's in order to have a place to share some of this more granular, detailed information. So I'm actually going to open this site now. The site is a work in progress. It started out as a place to post a few spreadsheets, a data summary for each active management area. And we have since expanded it, so you can see here we have links to each of those spreadsheets, one for each active management area. But we have since expanded it to include an interactive dashboard that you can filter by each AMA to see the differences between different sectors and different AMAs. So we're really proud of the work we've done, and we are continuing to expand both these types of tools and additional tools, other data communication and data transparency efforts across the agency. Yeah, so this information is both in those spreadsheets that I mentioned that have links on the page. It's also, there is a drop down here for each sector, so you can see individual sectors filtered out here. Sure. So we do have that data. It's not built into this dashboard at this point. It's something we do hope to improve upon. So the question was whether this can be further filtered to subsectors within industrial. We do hope to expand upon this dashboard, develop new dashboards, develop additional dashboards to provide additional levels of detail. But for now, that information is available in a spreadsheet form within these spreadsheets that you can link to for each AMA. And the source data for this dashboard is available as a download at the link at the bottom. So let me go back to the presentation. Okay. So I mentioned earlier in talking about our compilation process that we do pull from other data sources in order to generate those statewide water use estimates. We know that our reported data is incomplete. So frequently we are cobbling together both reported data and data from other sources in order to do a given analysis. You can see here some typical examples of the types of data sources. ADWR creates estimates of things like tribal demand, where we don't receive reports, and demands from exempt wells to better understand water usage inside the AMAs. We rely on the outputs of our regional groundwater models as well to analyze safe yield. And we'll be having lots of conversations around safe yield in the safe yield technical subgroup of this group. We get information also from reclamation in order to better understand total Colorado River water uses, and information from the USGS regarding water use estimates outside the AMAs. These data sources, again, are helpful, and each comes with its own set of assumptions and caveats, and each has its areas of strength and weakness. There are many ways in which this data and the way we look at it as an aggregate can be improved, and we hope that increased transparency can help generate productive conversations around what those improvements might be. Although through increasing the transparency and accessibility of both the raw data and the data tools like that dashboard, we, in concert with a number of other agency efforts, ADWR is working to improve its data consistency, reliability, and transparency. Part of that can consist of us communicating better about these data sources and what we see in terms of their reliability. Typically, the best form of data we have is the reported data from the AMA annual reports. And while other sources, such as the USGS numbers, can be immensely helpful, it's still a calculation-based estimate and might have a higher margin of error than things like the reported data inside the AMAs. We also know that even with reported data inside the AMAs, there are gaps within that reported data, and we are actively working to remedy some of that with upcoming changes in reporting requirements to include things like the number of acres that are actively irrigated in a given year. This type of information gives a more complete picture when it comes to analyzing the effectiveness of our conservation programs and whether they are contributing toward the goals of each AMA. Are there any questions so far? All right. Nothing so far? Great. So I'm going to move on into the next piece of this presentation, which is going to be kind of a high-level overview of each AMA, how its supply and demand are broken down, and also some information regarding safe yield, which, again, there are many caveats in many pieces of this data. What you'll begin to see here in this data is that each AMA kind of has its own particularities, its own flavor. These particularities influence the progress that that AMA may have made toward its goal. So on this slide, this may be a little bit hard to read. So on the bottom of the axis on the left-hand side, you have agricultural, municipal, industrial. So this side is the three sectors, with the different colors being different water types. And on the right-hand side, you have different water types with the different vertical colors being different sectors. So this particular slide, I'm just getting to that. This particular slide is actually all 5 AMAs aggregated. So what this reflects is 80% of the state's population and a little over 50% of Arizona's water use. So what you can see here is where municipal water use inside the AMAs is about 35% of the AMA use. That number is about 20% for when you look at a statewide number. The municipal sector, though, has a pretty diverse water portfolio. You can see that there's several different types of water included here, and it's broken down pretty evenly. Looking at the right side, you can see Colorado River water and surface water are largely used by agricultural and municipal users, where reclaimed water is more evenly split between the three sectors. So we'll look at each AMA individually. We're going to start with Prescott and work our way south. And again, you'll begin to see that each AMA has its own unique characteristics. Prescott's main water supply is groundwater. And although this AMA supply portfolio does have a higher proportion of effluent than the other AMAs, which they have worked to increase over time. Prescott's demands are also unique in the very high proportion that the municipal sector makes up, 77% in 2017. You can see also in the chart that agricultural demands have declined over time in the Prescott AMA as municipal and industrial demands increased. So we also have for each AMA a chart reflecting overdraft for that AMA. The blue solid line here reflects an annual calculation of overdraft, and the blue dotted line is a linear trend line for the entire time period worth of data. The green trend line is a linear trend line for the last 20 years worth of data in this chart. So what you can see here, again, in this particular meeting, I'm not going to get too far into the particularities of how overdraft is calculated. We have a whole subgroup that will get into all of those details if you are interested. But the takeaway message here, and what you'll see with the other AMAs, is that this annual calculation is wildly variable, that the trend lines you see might be less indicative of underlying trends and might just reflect kind of the luck of the draw of those particular years that they encompass. So if we're looking at this simplistically according to these trend lines, though, it does appear that while the Prescott AMA is in a state of overdraft, that the rate of that overdraft has been decreasing over the last 20 years. But again, I do want to reiterate that this can be influenced by a lot of things, and more work will be needed to have a better understanding of where the AMA is with regards to safe yield. These are conversations that we intend to continue and have ongoing as a part of that safe yield technical group. Moving into the Phoenix AMA, this AMA contains 60% of the state's population by itself and represents a little under 1/3 of the state's total water use. Groundwater use has decreased just very slightly in this AMA since the early 90s, but largely water use in this AMA has been relatively flat, despite that AMA nearly doubling its population in this time period. You can also see here that agricultural demands have decreased slightly over time, but they still make up nearly half of the total demands for this AMA. And again, so the trend lines here show a slightly different picture than they do for Prescott, with the 20-year trend line showing increasing overdraft for this AMA. And that's, again, the green trend line here. But again, the trend lines are different depending on what your frame of reference is. So if I were to shift this trend line to the 1991 to 2011 timeframe, because that timeframe had additional years of net recharge, it looks like the trend line is going down in the direction of increasing safe yield. So again, we need to do additional work through this group, through the technical subgroup, in order to lay out a methodology for all of the AMAs in order to better understand and to create some consistency around how we analyze this and communicate this. As of 2017, the Pinal AMA's water was a little bit under half groundwater. We do anticipate that this proportion of the water supply will grow in response to the availability of different types of renewable, changes in different types of renewable water in that AMA. So this pie chart might look very different in coming years. The Pinal AMA's demand is largely agricultural. Agricultural and tribal lands is a portion of this and has averaged about 15% of the total demands according to ADWR's estimates. While the Pinal AMA does not have a safe yield goal, it can still be instructive with regards to understanding the state that the AMA is in and analyzing overdraft for that AMA. Again, with many caveats, the 20-year trend line here does show increasing overdraft over time. Now, moving into Tucson, if any AMA can be said to be a success story, the Tucson AMA has many of the hallmarks of being that. While groundwater does make up about half of that AMA's water supply, groundwater usage has dropped significantly over time in this AMA, being replaced by Colorado River water. Demands in this AMA have, though, remained relatively constant over time, despite significant population growth in that AMA as well. Now, caveats about this analysis aside, the Tucson AMA is an exception when it comes to the difficulties of analyzing safe yield. Pretty much no matter where I shift that 20-year trend line to, no matter what frame of reference I use for the Tucson AMA, it kind of tells the same story, which gives us a pretty good feeling that the Tucson AMA, is actually moving toward or is approaching safe yield. So this really can be seen as a success story when it comes to talking about safe yield and meeting its goal. But again, even with this particular AMA and seeing progress toward its goal, there is still significant variability in this calculation over time. Finally, we have the Santa Cruz AMA. This AMA is almost entirely groundwater dependent, but it's also unique in that its water demands have a little bit more variability than some of the other AMAs, showing a response to some differences in annual water availability in that particular AMA. For this AMA, the trend lines show that the AMA appears to be in an overdraft condition, but the rate of overdraft has flattened in the more recent time span. So this last chart is, again, overdraft, but is a summary for all 5 AMAs. And I included this to demonstrate a little bit again that with the wild variability in these numbers, an annual and even a 5-year average number might not be that meaningful. So you can see, Phoenix is orange in this example, and you can see that in some of these cases it's in overdraft, in some of these cases it's in net recharge, but it's not consistent and it doesn't seem to be trending in any single direction. So again, with regards to safe yield, further analysis, further development of that methodology is going to be needed. So what does this all mean? And how do we move forward from here? This and other data goes into the development of the management plans, and it is our intent to use this group to inform that development. With the upcoming subgroup meetings, we intend to take a deeper dive into this data for each sector, going more into the details with the example of industrial of each subsector, going more into the details of the particularities of the usage in each sector in those subgroup meetings. And we'll begin to discuss how we might look at that data to better understand our existing conservation programs and how we might develop the next generation of these conservation programs. The analyses conducted by each subgroup will eventually feed into a published conservation report, reporting on the effectiveness of each of the existing conservation programs and progress toward the goal in each AMA. As I mentioned earlier, ADWR is actively working to improve data availability, communication, and transparency. All ADWR data is public. it is requestable. And we are working to make more of that data and more of our queries readily available online rather than people having to come to us and know what to ask for. There are already a number of live queries posted on our website. And again, I already mentioned the AMA data page and dashboard. Also, our recharge group has recently published a summary dashboard and has some great information on their accounting page as well. And these are links on this page in the presentation. This presentation is actually already posted online on our website, so you can have access to those. So we have a lot of room for improvement with our data, both in the way we collect it, the way we analyze it, the way we store it, the way we publish it. And this certainly is not the end of that conversation. We will be using the first round of subgroup meetings to dive deeper into each sector's data and to start to brainstorm analyses for those sectors. And we want feedback in this process and on our data. What can we do better in terms of communicating the data that we have and helping to shine light on the stories that this data can tell? Are there additional reporting requirements that we should institute? And are there other data sources that we should be looking into? We hope to continue these conversations and continue to get insights from all of you as we move forward in this process. Are there any questions, any comments yet? Nothing? Good. All right. So I've mentioned a few times here the first round of meetings, of subgroup meetings. I have here the dates for each of those meetings. These are also posted on our website. So municipal is on September 4th, agricultural on September 5th, industrial on September 10th, and that's a typo. Sorry about that. The Safe Field Technical meeting is actually on the 24th, not the 26th. Sorry about that. So these meeting dates are posted on our website, and all of those meetings will be happening at 1 p.m. in the Middle Verde Conference Room here at ADWR. We also plan to have a webinar available for each of those meetings. And then in addition to those, we plan to reconvene as this full group to report back on the progress of the subgroups on December 4th at 2 p.m. in this room. So a little bit of logistics about this particular group. We do want to reiterate that we intend for this process to be an open and collaborative process, and that can only occur with active participation from the interested parties and with focus on finding solution in which everyone contributes toward moving toward these common goals. We have been really pleased with the interest and engagement in the process so far. We are really pleased with the turnout for this meeting today. And I would just like to encourage continuing feedback and suggestions on what you all would like to hear from us, both in presentations in this meeting, in terms of guest speakers, in terms of additional information that we can provide in order to help best facilitate this process and move this process forward. We are making an effort to be as inclusive as possible. All meetings are open to anyone who would like to participate and contribute, and all meetings will have a webinar option. And with that, I would be glad to take any questions, and we can move back to any of the additional slides as needed. Kyle,
I gather from what you've said that you're only going to deal with the AMAs and nothing with other parts of the state regarding their water use and conservation requirements.
Right. So this particular group is focused on the management plans, which are particular to the AMAs, to those regulated parties, yes.
So I recognize that you're going to get into the details of the data that you presented here today in these future subgroup meetings, but it would be helpful to know the takeaway from that data was that our safe yield, whether or not we're reaching safe yield, is highly variable. Yeah. Could you just comment on what are the key components of variability? Because my guess is that water use is not as variable as that chart reflects. It's some other factors.
Sure. That's a really good point, yes. So again, there are a lot of components that feed into that annual safe yield calculation. No, water use is not as wildly variable as that final calculation shows. What we see in some of the variability is that it has to do with natural recharge, it has to do with changes in availability of surface water, but also that those things kind of add to each other and create wider swings than you might otherwise see based on just changes in water availability. So we've looked for correlations with various other factors. Obviously, rainfall in any given year is going to be one factor. We've seen that the economy might actually have influences on this as well. We want to do more work to better understand what those influences are, if we can correct for some of those influences in a way to better analyze this on a long-term basis. That is part of the conversation that we want to have in that safe yield technical group. Yes.
Natalie, zooming out a bit, the draft fourth management plan for the Phoenix AMA
yes.
states that it will be effective in 2023, and the fifth management period ends in 2025. When do you anticipate the fifth management plan will be completed, and when do you anticipate it will be effective?
So the reason the draft Phoenix Fourth Management Plan says 2023 is that the conservation measures in that plan go into effect 2 years after it is adopted. We anticipate that it will be adopted sometime in 2020. 2 years after that would be in the middle of 22, so we shift that to the beginning of the next reporting year so that we don't have partial years in there. So that's where that 2023 number comes from. Our intent is to complete the adoption of the remaining fourth management plans, so Phoenix, Pinal, and Santa Cruz, in the next 2 years. So, and then after that, we will begin the drafting of the fifth management plans. So the final adoption for those fifth management plans would depend on a number of factors. We don't have an estimated timeline for that at this point. I can say, though, that the management periods are a little bit separate from the management plans. Each management plan remains in effect until some successor comes into place. So the fourth management plan would remain in effect until the fifth management plan is adopted. The fifth management plan would remain in effect until something else comes after.
Hey, this is Fred Breedlove for the Roosevelt Water Conservation District. We have particular concerns about the fourth management plan, and I was hopeful that because it hadn't been mentioned until just now that maybe you decided just to scrap it and move ahead with the fifth management plan, like what we would actually recommend. We're afraid that the fourth management plan is not based in science. It's not based on public input. It's not based on any stakeholder vetting that may have occurred that I am not aware of. We strongly oppose the implementation of the way it is as drafted, and we're going to be following up with a letter to the director. And for that matter, I think it sets a bad precedent for the fifth management plan. During your lecture today, you've really outlined some good procedures and good steps that should have been followed for the fourth management plan, but I don't think it bodes well for the fifth management plan if it's already a predetermined outcome for how it's supposed to go. So with that, I just think, I'm not sure where to go with that. I think you need to be very careful about how the fourth management plan is implemented, if at all, and then make sure that the fifth management plan process is as robust as previous management plan efforts have been.
So we do have statutory obligations. We are required to complete for a number of different reasons, we will be completing the remaining fourth management plans. I do understand some of the concerns about the speed of the process. There was an extensive stakeholder outreach a number of years ago related to the development of the fourth management plan, and we have only made minimal changes since that stakeholder outreach process. So
I have a question about that, because when I mentioned it at the Phoenix CUAC meeting last month, and I think it was you who was presenting it, and I think you said that it was the outreach that occurred was at the Tucson AMA. And do I recall that correctly? And if so, how is that relevant to the Phoenix AMA?
Sure. So it was done kind of on an all AMAs basis, similar to this. The Tucson and Prescott AMAs have already adopted their fourth management plans. So maybe I misspoke in that meeting. I don't remember that particular context. But there was some outreach associated with those AMAs, associated with those promulgations. And in addition, the GUAC process, this process, are intended to be public outreach and feedback opportunities. We would love to hear, you said you were going to be sending a letter. I would love to see that letter, better understand the details of that opposition so that we can further discuss that and see if there are items there that need to be addressed. Oh, you have the microphone? Okay, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Your graphs for the PEMA AMA, did they include the Gila River Indian water use?
So the Pinal AMA includes estimates. You're talking about that one?
Right.
That does include estimates for tribal for agriculture on tribal lands. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I just had a quick question. Sandy Barr with Sierra Club, and maybe I just missed it, but the subgroups, the working groups, what is going to be the product that they come back to this group with? Because that wasn't clear to me. So what is it that they will bring here? And then I also wondered how you decided to break them into groups this way rather than by AMA or something else. I don't know that would be better, but I was just curious why this way. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. So the individual subgroups are really breakout groups so that we can get a little bit more into the weeds on those individual conservation programs. The management plans are a large, extensive document. We didn't want to try to have those detailed conservation program policy discussions in a large forum where a lot of people might not know a lot of the background information. So we're breaking out into subgroups, say the municipal subgroup, so that we can meet with the water providers, the cities, to get into the details of the existing conservation programs, how we can best understand those conservation programs and whether they're effective, and to start thinking about what changes we might make to those conservation programs if we need to develop totally new conservation programs under the fifth management plan. So those subgroups are really intended to be those very detailed development and analysis type conversations. Your other question was why by sector? So each active management area is required to have a management plan for each management period. So yes, each AMA could have a totally different conservation program for ag, muni, industrial. Instead, though, what we've done over time and what we've done from an administrative perspective on ADWR's part, so we can manage all of this, is those conservation programs across the AMAs are largely similar. There's some small differences between AMAs, but for the most part, the conservation programs are the same across the AMAs. So each municipal, to use it again as an example, each management plan in each AMA has two municipal programs, one non-per capita type program and one GPCD program. So yes, there's some slight differences between those programs, but it's easier from an administrative perspective, and it's easier from a development perspective to kind of develop those things together and then maybe slightly tweak them depending on the particularities of that AMA. We can do Chip and then Jackie.
See, for the development of the third management plan in the area of industry that I deal in, three of us that were stakeholders and hopefully some deal of expertise in the field sat down with the director of the Phoenix AMA and brainstormed what in the world are we going to do. And I think we came up with some pretty good ideas. My question to you is, these subgroups that you're proposing, what is the composition of them? How did you arrive at that? And I hope you're going to tell me that you're seeking advice, as this gentleman mentioned, in the formulation of these things, not just getting a group of people together to tell them what you've already decided you're going to do. So please tell me that's the case.
I have good news for you then. So this group is intended to be the development of the fifth management plans. This is for stakeholder feedback. So our intent is that we made some adjustments to the fourth management plans so that we can start to have conversations and consider bigger changes under the fifth management plans. So this is the development of those bigger changes. The individual subgroups, again, I mentioned earlier that we want this to be an open and inclusive process. These subgroups, this working group, does not have defined membership. If you are going to show up and participate and provide feedback, we want you to be here. So I hope you all will show up and participate.
Well, but you're answering the question in a way I hope you wouldn't, in that we're just going to show up and be told what's going to happen, and I guess we can say we disagree, but like in the fourth management plan, I'm pretty tight with my industry, and I don't recall anyone in the industry having had their opinion solicited. It was quite a surprise a few weeks ago when I told the industry what was happening.
So if I may, this is intended for the fifth management plans to be that solicitation process. We don't at this point have any kind of a proposal for what the fifth management plan is going to look like, with the exception that we intend to take bigger steps on conservation measures. That's kind of the only criteria. The statute lays out that the management plans should have conservation programs which, with a goal of reducing withdrawals of groundwater, so that's what we're working toward.
What sort of economic considerations to that point have you guys discussed? We operate similar businesses in Las Vegas, Palm Springs, Florida, as we do here in Phoenix. In those other markets, we're not facing the same kind of water allotment issues. At some point, the implementation of these water restrictions will have significant ramifications in our businesses that will put the marketplace here at a competitive disadvantage to those other markets. Have you guys considered those effects?
It's certainly always a consideration, but again, as a part of these subgroups, that can be a part of our analysis, is better with feedback from industry people or the water users themselves. That's what we're hoping for, is understanding what is it that we can do that's reasonable but is also productive. Do we have
Natalie? I just want to make sure that I understand. In the meetings in September is the first round of subgroup meetings, and then you have a meeting in December.
Correct.
Are these subgroups going to meet again, or are you intending that there's going to be one meeting and then the department's going to come to some conclusions from that?
So these subgroup meetings are going to be ongoing. What I have not defined here is what happens after this initial subgroup meeting. We will have those logistic type of conversations in each subgroup. So it's my intent that as a part of that meeting, yes, we're going to dive further into the data, but we're also going to have a conversation about how often should this particular subgroup meet? When is our next meeting going to be? What are our next topics and areas of focus? How can other people contribute toward this process? So it's really intended to be a collaborative process. We do want feedback on all of those pieces from the people participating in those subgroups.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to pick on you, and I don't mean to be mean because I'm not typically a mean person. I mean, Bass will vouch for me, but you keep talking about getting feedback from stakeholders, and I guess my only comment on that is I would encourage you. I think previous iterations of this process have been stakeholder-driven and not feedback, not driven by the agency and getting feedback from the constituents. It's stakeholder driven, and I would encourage you to adopt that kind of a process.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Kirsten Engel, Arizona Legislature. So I understand that you're breaking this down, municipal and agricultural, industrial, but it does seem like there's information that applies across the board to all of these with respect to the content of the fifth management plan that really hasn't been part of today's presentation. And I'm just wondering if you have that data and whether or not that will be made available to the public, such as, what actually needs to be done to bring these areas into safe yield? What quantities of water are we talking about? We've seen, what proportion of the water is coming from different areas and what the demand is, but it seems like we need to know in terms of figuring out what to do, what is the task before us? What have we been able to accomplish with the tools that we've so far used in the management areas? And so what is that difference that we need to make up with new tools or, I guess, more aggressive use of some of the existing tools? So I'm just wondering, could that be a part of a separate presentation that applies across the board? Because otherwise it's so broken down that I'm afraid that big picture is going to be lost.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. So this particular information maybe could be seen as kind of preliminary. So some of the information analysis data that you're talking about is something that we still need to develop and that we hope to analyze through that Safe Yield Technical Group on the 24th, not on the 26th. So yes, we do plan on bringing additional data back from the subgroups to this main group to share that more broadly because, yes, it is all connected. But also, at this stage, we have not necessarily conducted all of those analyses. So each of the subgroups will be conducting analyses associated with safe yield or with their particular sector, and all of that will feed back into this main group and into the development of the management plans as a whole, if that makes sense. So I do hope that we will have another data presentation in the future. What we don't have at this point is good agreement on the methodology around understanding safe yield, around understanding how far we are from safe yield, because it's very dependent on how exactly you look at it. So what I hope to have out of the Safe Yield Technical Group is some consensus around how we are analyzing that and some agreement on what are the best ways to understand long-term safe yield as compared to this very variable annual type of analysis.
Hi, Rory Van Pocky. I was just wondering, what kind of information research do you need from the different groups to present to you, and when is the best time to get it to you?
If any of the different sectors, if any of the different groups have access to good information that might be helpful throughout the course of analyzing these sectors, understanding the conservation programs, we would love to see that data. The types of data might be dependent on the particular application, so it's kind of hard to answer that in a general way. But if there's good research out there, if there's good sources that we can cite in the management plans to help us further develop these conservation programs and further understand the water conservation that's already been done, we would love to see those, yes. And those could be submitted either through the subgroups, they could be emailed. We're open to working with you on how that might be done.
Natalie, during the Prescott AMA Fourth Management Plan process, the local GUAC was heavily involved. The GUACs have an important role in this. I don't see them mentioned in this process. How are you going to incorporate them?
So since this is a process for all 5 AMAs, we didn't want to include any one single GUAC. So all of the GUACs and the interested parties associated with each of those GUACs in those meetings have been informed of these meetings. We used that same mailing list to blast out our meeting announcements to everyone. So we are in communication with the GUACs. I personally have attended a number of the GUAC meetings. Management plan staff has attended a number of the GUAC meetings. We intend to keep each of those councils informed of what we were doing. We would love for them to come participate either here or via webinar, but also they will obviously be involved as we get to the point of publishing each active management area's plan. Any other questions? Teresa? Oh, okay. One last question.
Yeah, I really didn't wake up this morning and decide, laying awake in bed, to pick on you today. One last time. Went to an industry meeting this morning about water, and Mr. Chandler from your department comforted the audience that the input regarding this process was going to be greatly inclusive of them. And now I find out that it isn't. Lisa Allen also gave a presentation, and if I can correctly quote her final sentence, was that if you feel that your input is not being included, you have a great deal to worry about.
One by one. But
final comment.
So if I can help clarify, we are intending this to be an inclusive process. Like I said, we're kind of at the very, very beginning of the process. We want to hear ideas. We want to hear from the different sectors, the different water users, because you all are the experts on how you use your water. So we want to better understand from you all how we might move forward toward these common goals of reducing groundwater use, of moving towards safe yield or moving toward the goals of each AMA. So perhaps I've not communicated that well, but we really are hoping to hear input, hear feedback, solicit your ideas on the development of this 5th management plan. We hope that you will attend the industrial subgroup meeting, because that's where the turf program is. But we do hope to have an inclusive process where we are listening to everybody's feedback and listening to everybody's information.
Natalie, I think that perhaps some of the frustration is that in a complex project like this, where you're putting together a master plan, it's a water plan, is that typically you would go out and reach out to stakeholders, go to them, meet with them, find out what their issues are, find out what kind of data they have available. And I think what the department is asking everybody to do is, we're going to have these meetings, and if you're interested, you show up. And, if you don't, then too bad, we invited you. And I think that is part of the frustration that you're going to hear from people, such as, the turf people.
Thanks for that, Jackie. So maybe to clarify, I should say that this is not the only form of outreach or research that we're doing associated with this management plan. ADWR certainly is doing additional behind-the-scenes work in order to prepare for all of this, in order to research and talk to the groundwater users in separate meetings. This is not the only forum for that. So if it would be, we do want this to be a public and transparent process as much as possible, but we are doing additional legwork and additional research in addition to these particular meetings.
My name is Terry Sue Rossi. I'm with Arizona Water Company. So would it be in bounds for us to develop proposals outside of this venue and then come into this room and present those proposals, or would that be out of bounds?
We would absolutely love to hear those sorts of proposals. It might be, so since you work for a water provider, it might be more on topic, I guess, to present that specifically at that subgroup meeting, at the municipal subgroup meeting, just because that's where we're going to get kind of into those fine-grained details about those programs. But we are absolutely open to hearing those types of proposals from outside, yes.
So then the format, perhaps, that you're describing to us is that we independently develop proposals either on our own or get together with our friends, and then we come back and present those proposals in an appropriate subcommittee, and then those are worked to the subcommittee and then come to this group. Is that the model that you're envisioning?
That can be an option, or whether you all come to ADWR with those proposals or whether you come to the subgroup with the proposals, we're open to hearing that sort of feedback in a variety of different manners. It doesn't have to be one particular path.
So we could do it in a variety of different venues, but the primary foundation of it is we get to develop the proposals and then move them forward.
I think so.
Okay.
Natalie, I'll just go ahead and make a few comments. Since my name was beckoned into this discussion. So this process is not etched in stone. It can be improved. You have recommendations to, is it just too loud or?
No, guys, we have people on the webinar. I just want to make sure they're.
Oh, okay. I'm Clint Chandler. Just identify for the webinar. So basically, this is does this not work or? Okay. Well, then it seems like I'm yelling at people. I have one of these voices that fast often reminds me that projects, so I try not to appear like I'm just. So Clint Chandler, I'm the assistant director for the department. So this is a first step, an effort to construct a process that is indeed inclusive, that will help us, enable us to receive good data and information. That's the purpose of the subgroups, is to provide those points of contact for more discussion, more granularity, and I think the aim there was to give the stakeholders some ownership where they can help drive the process. So if we need to break the subgroups down by AMA, then we can do that. And it's an organic effort, so we can make adjustments as we go. Seems readily apparent to me from the discussion we're having today, we probably are going to have to make additional adjustments, and we're open to that. So we'll take the substance of these comments back to Director Bushotsky, and we may go to the drawing board a bit and revisit certain items. Some things we may just have to continue to adhere to the plan with. Because we also were under considerable pressure to get these expedited. The 4MP is purposed to be an initial step. It's a small marginal step forward, and we're going to have more extensive conversations vis-a-vis the 5MP. And we also have in another lane a committee that's a derivative panel of the Governor's Water Council that is post-2025. So all these, as I had mentioned this morning at Cactus and Pine, these are all going to overlap. So with all those discussions occurring in parallel, sometime intersecting, we have the opportunity for, I believe, receipt of a lot of input. And we may have to tinker with things as we go. We may have to make some adjustments, and we can do that.
Exactly to that point, how realistic through this collaborative effort on working with one another, how realistic
through this collaborative effort, working together, the various stakeholders, we provide you information. How realistic is it that the decisions that have been made in the fourth management plan could be potentially reversed in the fifth management plan? Or is that fifth management plan already sort of been predetermined on what the statistical data we will be utilizing with several years from now?
Well, the 5MP has not been predetermined. These processes are purposed to...
That's my question. So you would say it's realistic, some of the decisions of the fourth management plan could be reversed by the time the fifth management plan comes around based on these collective stakeholder working groups?
Well, I guess it's possible. We're going to, I can't predetermine here and now if that's going to occur.
Possible is a lot different than practical.
Well, we'll receive the input. There are so many different things that enter into the mix, and there's all these different elements that we're going to have to account for, and we're going to receive that information. We want good data. That's one thing that we're requesting of everybody is to make your case. That's something that the director has emphasized, as I had indicated this morning, that those expressions of your views, your positions, your case need to be made publicly. We all want it out in the open so it can be accounted for, it can be vetted. And some of it could be technical, some of it could be at a higher level, it could be political, but you know what? We have to really come up with a defensible plan, and if we're taking steps in another direction, then that will receive a lot of scrutiny. And our water outlook remains challenged. So it's going to have to occur in that milieu, in that context. But I can't stand here today and say that we will or we won't. And I'm not king. I don't make those decisions. We're going to receive a lot of input from a whole lot of people. I think we're going to collect a lot of good information, and then we're going to make choices down the road through good process. Representative.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could go over again the time frame of completing the 4 MPs and the 5 MP, just so that we're all clear on what the time frame is. Is that possible? Sure. Thank you.
Clint, I can take that. So we just recently published a draft for the Phoenix Fourth Management Plan. The next Phoenix GUAC meeting is September 10th, I believe. So we plan to follow up with the Phoenix GUAC at that time to respond to their comments and answer any additional questions that they have. After that point, we're hoping to start what's called promulgation of that plan. So that's the formal adoption process for that plan. Once we complete the adoption process for the Phoenix plan, then we'll do the same thing for the Pinal AMA and for the Santa Cruz AMA. We are hoping to complete the final adoption of all 3 of those remaining fourth management plans in the next 2 years. Once that is completed, then we'll be starting the drafting of the fifth management plans, and we don't really have a draft timeline for that at this point.
As you can tell by the colors, I've been around a while. Management plans are by nature additive. They build on the foundation of the previous management plan. In terms of the Pinal AMA, as you've heard me say before, we had approved the GUAC following the time-tested methodology, had approved a fourth management plan and recommended it to the department. And it, in fact, started through the rulemaking process. And it was pulled back, and we were told there are going to be amendments, which will be foundational. We have all heard for the fifth management plan. It does occur to me that the net result of this new methodology is the fifth management plan is going to be one size fits all. Maybe a comma gets changed here, maybe a fraction gets changed there, but it's one size fits all. I can't speak for my GUAC, let alone the other four. But we represent the users of that AMA. And quite frankly, to Mr. Mundelow's point, we're going to be coming in as a GUAC after the fact. We will be presented with something, yes. As individuals, we are encouraged to participate in these almost statewide subgroups. But the inputs are not AMA specific, they are sector specific. And I would submit to you that's a way different way to skin this cat, and I love cats.
Okay. We'll take just one or two more questions or comments. We are actually over time already, so I don't want to keep you all. I know you're all busy. Harry, please.
So I'm just wondering, to what degree should we expect that the fourth management plan is sort of done, and that it would really not be the best use of our time to debate the fourth management plan and just begin focusing on the fifth management plan right away? So to what degree is the fourth management plan sort of locked and loaded, if you will?
Sure. So this particular forum is intended to be for the development of the fifth management plans. The fourth management plans, obviously, we're still completing Phoenix, Pinal, Santa Cruz, but this particular forum is really intended to be moving beyond that to be focusing on the development of the fifth management plans. The opportunity for comment on those remaining fourth management plans can be either through GUAC meetings or sending written comment directly to ADWR. We actually have a management plans email address. It's managementplans@azwater.gov, where you can submit comments at any time. And you can also reach out to ADWR in other ways. We are available to listen to those sorts of comments, but this particular forum, this work group, is intended to be focusing on the fifth management plan.
As part of the promulgation process, you're going to print a draft and accept public comment on that before you finalize it, right?
That's correct. So part of the process for adopting a management plan is that we present that management plan to the GUAC. We then, as a part of the formal adoption process, have a hearing and accept comments associated with the hearing. There are multiple points at which people can submit comments on those management plans, yes. So, okay. We will go ahead and wrap up quickly since we're already a little bit over time. I apologize. I really appreciate everybody's questions and comments today. Thank you so much for coming and participating. We do hope that you will attend the subgroup meetings, attend the next work group meeting, and any additional questions and comments can be submitted to us anytime at managementplans@azwater.gov. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you.